This is KOOP HD1 HD3 Hornsby, radio for people, not for profit. Welcome to Volumes, the Austin Public Library radio show. Each week, we explore how your library is more than books. The library is knowledge, technology, and inspiration for our community.
I'm Valerie, the director-editor of the Challenger Street newspaper. We started in 2011 as a job opportunity for people on the streets and people in poverty. We are the voice of the homeless, with 95% of our writers being homeless or formerly homeless. To empower people in need with economic opportunity and have their viewpoints heard. This paper uplifts and gives information to our most underrepresented people. It encourages responsibility and freedoms necessary to enhance our everyday life. The people we serve have a wealth of information to share with society. The paper contributes, informs, and connects diverse people from all walks of life. The challenge is to end poverty.
The opinions expressed in the following stories reflect the authors and are not the opinions of Co-op Radio or the Austin Public Library. Thank you for listening.
My name is Christopher Carr. I'm a writer-distributor for the Challenger. One of the poems in the selection was inspired by the recent death of Donald Hall, who is a giant of American poetry. He died in Wilmot, New Hampshire about a month ago, give or take. And it's interesting because for me, his death illustrated one of his ideas about American poetry, because he often accused the poetry of being degraded, American poetry being degraded. He referred to the Mick poem, and he often, every year when they gave out the Pulitzer to the luminaries of little magazines, Donald Hall would go on his Twitter page and say that Ronald McDonald has taken the Pulitzer again, because he was opposed to the fact that mass production and the covetousness of poets, or what Harold Bloom called the literary overpopulation that's going to be the bane of the existence of any literary fame for any of these people. But anyway, so the second poem that I'm going to read is inspired by Donald Hall's poetry. That is basically like a riff on the biblical rhetoric from the minor prophets in the Old Testament. Especially there's the book of Zephaniah, where you have a lot of very strident, frightening language emanating from the prophet. And so this poem, the poem by Donald Hall called Prophecy from the One Day, and it's unlike any of his other poems. So the poem that I'm going to read first is inspired by the one day, and it's like a prophecy from the Bible. So I took that up and tried to create a rhetorical framework from my understanding, and this is part of an apocalyptic novel called The Jesuit Judgment. And I wanted to preface this as an apocalyptic novel by defining something in poetry called a persona. Quite often people mistake the person in the poem for the poet, and I don't want this to be a mistaken for me, otherwise people would think I have a messianic delusion or something like that. So the first one is called The Jesuit Judgment. I am the cross in the last wood. Here facsimiles of God are permitted somehow. The aspersion upon failures of preemption, failures of pedagogy porn over the wicked, bankers and sex moguls, wet houses, from the only wrath, the rain. And these guarantees of their self-regard, the wicked, ensconced in their things, from their own sane achievement, I come to understand. English, the beginning and end of this, the phonologic strings of hell, or a hell perhaps. What goodness affects? Lies fall down in the paltry of screams, come down to us in desperation. An unheralded metaphysics of the dead, I submit Hebrew prophecy, and they are not annulled. In their covenants of death multifarious, marked by narratologies of deceit, and a whole host of golden wherewithals. Speaking of narratologies, the Muppets of their post-historical Maoism, the nationhood of forgetting in style. The actual Muppets, make no mistake, the size of a 10-story building on a Times Square jumbotron. I submit the purple and yellow racialisms in their mohawk of unheralded mockingbird, all revealed history disgorged elsewhere, beside the white anachronisms. apron and glamour of occult sciences, the quilty of names and the sound of a male gaze, the quilty and the haze before crime and color, the quilty hunting the word, the street, death's little political economy, these false epidemiological portraits apropos of wet death in mass. And then the second poem is called War is Hell, a banker's totemic allegory of eternity. And for those of you that don't know what a totem is, maybe from a totem pole, but that doesn't explain what a totem is, that a totem is something that occupies the material world and the spirit world simultaneously. So the allegory of this is a historical description of the Battle of Verdun in World War I. And so I had this fantasy that bankers are dropped on the battlefield of Verdun as punishment for their crimes in creating war in the 20th century. So War is Hell, a banker's totemic allegory of an eternity. During the bombardment, the German garrison in the fort experienced great strain as French heavy shells smashed holes in the walls, and concrete dust, exhaust fumes from an electricity generator, and gas from disinterred corpses polluted the air. Here, survivors taking post in shell holes and dips in the ground. On 22 June, German artillery fired 116,000 diphosgene Green Cross gas shells at French artillery positions, causing 1,600 casualties and silencing much of the French artillery. Rain, combined with the constant tearing up of the ground, turned that clay of the area into a wasteland of mud and human remains. Forests were reduced to tangled piles of wood by constant artillery fire. Many broke down due to shell shock. Some French soldiers attempting desertion to Spain. Those being caught were court-martialed and shot. A French lieutenant killed by a shell wrote in his diary, 23 May 1916, "Humanity is mad. It must be mad to do what it is doing. What a massacre. What scenes of horror and carnage. I cannot find words to translate my impressions. Hell cannot be so terrible. Men are mad." Here, the occult Jekyll banker who started the 20th century hemoclism. Now he's a dead banker smelling Verdun forever. Well, this is called Second Amendment. And then it starts with the actual text of the Second Amendment. A well-regulated militia, being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. The first thing in the Second Amendment that stands out is archaic forms of capitalization. The words capitalized, aside from the article beginning the Second Amendment, are militia, state, and arms. The word people is not similarly capitalized. What does one suppose capitalization means in 18th century orthography? Why don't we know? If it is a nominal rule, the word people would be capitalized as well, but it is not. In light of history, the word people is parallelized with the word militia. The word militia is capitalized. The word people is not capitalized. The notion of a well-regulated militia is certainly meant to countervail any absolute right afforded the individual who is not congruent with the collective word people. And that vigilant oversight is spelled out very specifically. The right views well-regulated as being a slippery slope which will lead the government to the regulating of the ownership rights of individuals. But this is a surmise of what has not happened. That is, a well-regulated militia or well-regulated individual, neither of these things have made it into history. And while we talk about our inability to do background checks on purchasing in the same country, that country has a Social Security number related to every single one of us. And so the bureaucracy of the Social Security Administration can be looked as a model for dealing with guns in the United States. One problem in the United States is that we live in an historical welter, by which I mean an historical innovation that we're still trying to figure out. We had a handle on the last part of the 20th century, and I kind of look at now, we don't have a handle on what's going on now, and it's kind of hard to figure it out. As an example, social science and the accreditation regime of the United States. They might identify the statistics of things that happen in a nation of 340 million people, but do any accredited social scientists do anything about these problems? There are people in other departments at the University of Texas that put up "no guns at UT" in their window. That's really compelling, isn't it? I think it's interesting that people who are some of the most wordsmiths at putting thoughts on paper and addressing the controversies of the United States would put something so simplistic and simple-minded in their window because they're opposed to the campus carry initiative that would allow students and anyone else to carry guns on the UT campus. I take a postmodern historicist view of this in history. That is, things which appear disaggregate may be described as aggregate. What I mean is that there is a postmodern militia secondary to mass production. Whence this mass production? Every mediastic ritual of public grief, counseling, is actually manufacturing that next shooter our government will do nothing about. Because the media models celebrity worship of the murderer, and some susceptible person watches it, then the ritual of public grief cultivated by the media is literally manufacturing the next shooter.
I'm Alice. I'm going to be reading Eat With Us by Pirate Joe. A month or so ago, someone was telling me from the street about a function they went to. I will mention no identities for this. The function was addressing homelessness in the area. During the function, the question was posed to the attendees, how can we stop homelessness? At this point, when the story was being told to me, there was an organic pause of frustration. So they're just going to fix it, are they? I cynically mused. I just kept quiet, man, but you should have heard what they said. I don't want to repeat any of it. I don't really know how to feel about it. They're trying to help the best way they can think of, and I don't want to spoil it, you know? I read something on the wall of an AA corkboard once. I remember the sentiment, but not the exact quote. It was something like the Good Samaritan parable, but instead it was a victim of alcoholism stuck in a hole. I don't remember the excuse the first two gave the alcoholic for not helping, and I don't remember what the hero said to the alcoholic exactly, but I do remember he jumped into the pit with the alcoholic to help him out of it and remarked that it took someone doing the same for him once, and that it was the only way he knew of to get out of that particular problem. It required personal involvement. These folks are like the first two people in the Good Samaritan. Frankly, so are many of the people who volunteer at soup kitchens. It's not help people in this situation need, it is community. How often do you see a volunteer come in off their time and eat a bowl of soup next to someone? I've never even heard of that. That's probably a prime contributing factor to the problem of the streets as a cultural whole. No one would stand for someone they care about to be treated the way most street cats are treated. Who's to say which deserve being wretched and who it fell upon? Damn, man, do you always have to smash things with your whole brain? We laughed it off at that, but it stuck with me. The only way people can get together to discuss resolving the streets like an afternoon school special seems to be guilty of the same ignorance that has at least partly contributed to the streets existing the way it does. If you want to solve the streets to any extent, one must learn some part of them. The easiest way? Go eat with the street at one of their more public feeds as one of them, then listen for at least a month before you start trying to fix anyone. Want to learn? Do your homework, especially if you want to learn about the world where the safety net ends.
My name is Blair Parsons, and I'm a librarian at the Central Library. Each week I highlight a selection of programs for adults that are happening around the Austin Public Library, and our full list of programs may be found on the library's events calendar. Thursday night, August 16th, the Central Library hosts Why Not? YA for Adults. You're never too old for young adult fiction. Stop being a secret reader of YA and join like-minded adults for this monthly discussion of young adult literature. We'll have laughs, we'll have tears, we'll enjoy all the angst without ever having to step inside a high school. This month we will be discussing Amy Lynn Reed's The Nowhere Girls. Why Not? YA for Adults meets at 7 o'clock, Thursday, August 16th at the Central Library. The Austin Symphony Ensemble will perform at 3 o'clock, Saturday, August 18th at the Ruiz Branch Library. This casual afternoon concert will be followed by an instrument petting zoo in which folks can interact with instruments and ask questions of symphony musicians. The Austin Symphony Ensemble and Instrument Petting Zoo is from 3 o'clock to 5 o'clock, Saturday, August 18th at the Ruiz Branch Library.
Hey there, Austin. Teen Program Specialist Michael Harley from the Downtown Central Library here. All read out for the summer? The library is more than just books. Board with Books, the library's board game series, is having a special youth edition for kids and teens. Teens can try their hand at a variety of board games and meet other board game enthusiasts to play with. Board with Books meets this Thursday, August 16th at the Yarborough branch from 2:30 p.m. to 4:30 p.m. More details on Board with Books and additional programs can be found at library.austintexas.gov/events.
This is Alana Graves, the youth librarian at the Carver branch. Summer may be coming to an end, but there are still free library events for kids. This week, the Hampton branch at Oak Hill is hosting Glitterpalooza on Saturday, August 18th from 2 p.m. to 4 p.m. Kids of all ages can make a glittery, sparkly mess, as well as make fun crafts such as glitter bracelets, glitter fireworks, and glitter magnets. There will also be face painting with, you guessed it, glitter! All supplies and glitter will be provided. Details at library.austintexas.gov.
You're listening to Volumes, the Austin Public Library radio show on Co-op 91.7 FM and KOOP.org. Radio for people, not for profit.
Support comes from Eastside Pies, local pizza with local ingredients. 3 locations around Austin: Eastside off Rosewood, Airport and 53rd, and Anderson Lane. Take out or eat in. Online ordering now available at eastsidepies.com.
Support for Co-op comes from Malvern Books, specializing in literature and poetry from independent publishers, with a focus on lesser-known and emerging literary voices. Malvern Books is located at 29th and Rio Grande, with on-site parking available. Open 7 days. More information at malvernbooks.com.
I'm Valerie, the director-editor of the Challenger Street newspaper. This paper uplifts and gives information to our most underrepresented people. It encourages responsibility and freedoms necessary to enhance our everyday life. The people we serve have a wealth of information to share with society.
The opinions expressed in the following stories reflect the authors and are not the opinions of Co-op Radio or the Austin Public Library. Thank you for listening.
My name is Pirate Joe, according to the Challenger newspaper. I've written for this paper for about 2.5 years, and the title of this article, which is out in the November issue of the Challenger Street newspaper, is called An Educated Opinion. And it is kind of a snarky title, I'm not going to lie. I'm not trying to be too pretentious about it, but the subject matter has to do with a professor that challenged a paradigm I had. So I'm trying to boast at least a little bit of learning.
Okay, so here we go. I'm Valerie Romness, and I'm the director-editor, and I'm going to read Joe's article. It's called An Experienced Opinion. I did not end up homeless. I chose this. I sought it out. The faux homeless condition will exist until more people do this. 1,000 years ago, in a former life at Austin Community College's Rio Grande campus, I had a professor named Joe Hoppy. One of the professor review websites I had used had a succinct statement that summed up any course the man instructed: not for the faint of heart. He was, maybe still is, a member of the old guard of higher education, a critical thinker. Like a bloodhound, he honed in on any argument or statement that began with, I believe. One of my favorite Hoppy retorts was, what concerns me is what you understand. Do you know where this belief comes from? An educated opinion is no substitute for an account of experience. This was something I went on about in his class. One day, the subject of homelessness came up, and this was the seed that began my travels. Have you been homeless before? Is where Hoppy led the debate. After high school, I lived out of my car and couch surfed a bit before the military, I responded. That doesn't quite count. What I meant to specifically ask is, have you gone for long periods of time without money, the ability to make it, or a social network to offer your support? No, sir, I have not. Do you think you ever will be in this situation? Maybe, but I doubt it. Why not? I'm a capable man. I make friends easily. I have a work ethic. I am adaptable and resourceful, even without a social network. Hoppy smiled. So what you're saying is that you have no account of experience behind your educated opinion. I was not merely stunned, I was altered by this statement. I had a self-aware moment of just how ignorant I was to the deep primal fear I had of this condition. Further, I understood to my bones that if I did not rectify this before something beyond my control snatched the trimmings of my life away, I would compromise every ethic I hold allegiance to and sacrifice my morality on the altar of fear to prevent this. You know what fear makes us all do. It took me a long time to look this moment of clarity full on again, about 1.5 years. I can jump into danger with a grin, but I couldn't look this homeless thing in the face. It was a slow nagging. Not that I didn't understand homelessness, but that I had to admit to myself the kind of absolute monster it would turn me into if I didn't meet it on the field first. I have done many things that people call brave and tough. Usually I wasn't paying attention enough to be scared. Giving everything up was not one of these bold things. I simply let everything in my life slowly lapse by design. I even told all my friends that I was couch surfing with after my lease expired that they would most likely have to throw me out. So I couch surfed with those of my friends who had enough backbone to do this. It was January 2013 when I finally hit the street. It was the best, toughest, and most educational experience of my life to date. You can really see through the emperor's clothes on the street if your mind isn't numbed by desperate fear or an addiction. Usually, sometimes those help to see too. I don't recommend it though. One of my accounts of experience of the streets and of homelessness is this. We know little else in first world countries but how to substitute survival knowledge with a trip to the store. It is a condition of a society that does not educate its people of how to readily live off the land, and those accustomed to dependency from birth are totally unaware of it until they fall out of the system. And even then, few seem to be aware of this. If you have read this far, there might be one more person who sees through the emperor's clothes.
There's a professor at ACC, and he flirts around between campuses. When I met him is when I attended a few of his classes. We always had, and I was introduced to him by another professor, by the way. I was like shanghaied by this man. That professor's name is John Herndon. He's also an English professor. And John Herndon does a poetry night at ACC, and I've read there several times. They've both let me drag people off the street to read their poetry at that poetry night, too. So you have all these academic sweater vests going, these street people that, like, totally don't match my latte, but I'd like to hear what they've written. It's really kind of a magic moment. Anyway, so Hoppy and I had the productive side of an argumentative basis, you know, where each one is practicing who they are and gaining insight instead of competing who's right and who's wrong. We both, and him to a large degree, probably challenge. I'm not really going to even keep score. I know it was, you know, the shared experience of it. He, the professor, I was the student, but I didn't. He had a life of correcting other people's, you know, papers, and he had a wonderful opinion and he was a great person to calibrate how you used your mind. However, I used to pick on him because he lived mostly out of books, and he'd talk about all these adventures that some of these writers have, and I was like, you've never really done that, have you? He rose to every single occasion. He never acted like I caught his hand in a cookie jar. It just seemed to him like a more missed opportunity, something to write about. You know, he's like, if I can get around to it, though. He was never intimidated about it at all. He still rose to the occasion. He just came via a route of flying a desk to it. But he cornered me. He really cornered me one day after class when this subject matter came up. And I had a lot of experience in a lot of different places in life, but I came through the route myself by never really knowing poverty. I crashed with friends who didn't make a living, but I always had a line into some sphere of education, some realm of the government, some parts of the military, because I have no criminal history to speak of and usually don't burn bridges down. I more came to the street via and through life more of a backpacking. Even though I'd never been homeless, I myself, because of a lifestyle like that, had never really had a home either. It was a moment where I think he noticed somehow, because he studied all his students as carefully as me, by the way. There was no actual, on a note of being a preferred student and us chatting this long was a courtesy this man showed to every person in his class he could, too, by the way. I was no by any means favored pupil or anything. He's the anvil of logic for everybody's opinion, regardless of who you are. So something about him, I'm willing to bet he noticed that I had and I've never had any misgivings towards poverty or homeless folks. If I've ever had a few spare dollars, yeah, man, go get yourself something to drink, go get yourself something to eat. But I always did identify myself as a separate population that would be never in that condition. And unless it hits a rude chord in you, or you have a classist vein in you, you can still dismiss an entire population, even though you don't mean them any ill will. Just like, well, I am not like that. You and I share nothing in common. I did subscribe a little bit to that. Well, you've just made a lot of bad decisions to get here, and all you got to do is just pull yourself up, make a few decisions, and here's enough money to get a sandwich while you're doing that, man. But because I dismissed them as an entire population, I think Hoppy caught to that. Because he didn't ask me what it would be like to go around backpacking or what it'd be like to live off the land at some Indian reservation. He brought up that specific paradigm and a few more questions. That conversation was longer than just that, of what it would be like to experience life as this judged thing, instead of a number of different ways you can interpret it. And I did kind of freak out when I noticed, holy crap, and where it started was, what I didn't write down was, one of my initial responses was very seriously, I said, I will never allow that to happen to me.
As I was reading this in preparation of putting it in the paper as the editor, it strikes me that you can't judge all homeless people the same, that there's different personalities in the world, and that just because somebody doesn't have money or doesn't mean they're not resourceful.
Well, it does, because it's a backward paradigm. If the people who are being wanderers, let's just say, got together and decided for this diverse group, most of us would decide to be called homeless, then everybody would judge them as a diverse group. But homelessness is a label that has been cooked up and fed through people, through media and print, that is a thing. Homelessness is an institutionalized idea as a consumable piece of media. We have all been taught to view other people that have had no real say, because the conditions of that situation of living doesn't really give you time to have a regular life enough to write stuff down or an opportunity to publish a viewpoint. Homelessness is a term of dismissal. And most people who use the term I wasn't aware of it initially. I had to learn this from the inside out. There is no cohesive thing, there is no understandable phrase that comes out of homeless other than, you were taught to dismiss people with this word, weren't you? Because the second you get to know any homeless person in the street, you might call them homeless, but that person becomes Brad or Sarah, and they're just out of their job, and they're from New York, or they're from Nevada. And if somebody says, but are they homeless? Most people who know Brad or Sarah or something like, yeah, but you don't understand. I mean, there's reasons for that. Once that phrase, there's reasons for that, come up, people stop being homeless, because in the conversation that they're not even at. Right then, that's the curve that gets everybody everybody to relate to them as a person. I'm telling you, homelessness is a tool that we have been taught to, as a society, like a conspiracy theorist psyop game, and it doesn't take anybody to misplan that. Just a piece of fiction, an idea like a fashion gets going in the subconscious of society, we all begin to do that. There doesn't have to be a screaming madman saying, I'm gonna fool everybody for the culture. We're dumb enough to do this on ourselves, you know? I mean, we can be this stupid all on our own, and that's kind of why I'm trying to cross a line here, is saying that there's no one way to really end up in this situation. So it can't be a universal, one word describes this entire myriad of situations that can line you into this condition.
These are the voices of our writers reading their own work. I hope you enjoyed our sampler of voices. The articles are online at challengernewspaper.org. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening to Volumes, the Austin Public Library radio show. Special thanks to our producer, DJ Harris, and to the musicians who composed and performed our original theme song, Andrew Noble on violin, Kirk Duvall on guitar, and Mike Wheat on percussion. And thanks to you, our listeners. Volumes, the Austin Public Library radio show, airs Wednesday afternoons at 2:30 on Co-op 91.7 FM and koop.org. If you catch us mid-show, full episodes and other details can be found at library.austintexas.gov/volumes.